Welcome, everybody, to the Imagine Your Future podcast. I'm Karen Collyer, your host for today. Steve, unfortunately, can't be with us. He's feeling a little under the weather, but we do have a special treat in store for everyone. We'd like to welcome back Caley from Poppy to bring us up to speed on what's been happening with the startup. And we had such a huge response to our earlier episode with her. We thought you'd be interested in learning a little bit more. So hi, EC. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me back. I've been really looking forward to it.
It's excellent. We've been looking forward to it too. So I have been following your travels on LinkedIn, quite jealous of all of your posts. You've gone to some pretty cool places. Would you be able to start us off with a few minutes on what's new with Poppy, where you are and what you envision your product lifecycle to be, and where you are in your go-to-market plan?
Oh, it'd be my pleasure. So just as a reminder, what we're doing at Poppy is we've been bringing biotechnology to buildings, trying to make the things that are invisible, visible. Those are viruses, bacteria, molds, all the things that have been affecting the entire planet for the last few years and for essentially eternity before that. And we're in growth. We're in hyper growth. And it's my favorite stage, having done a few early stage companies before. Scaling problems are the best kind of problems to have.
Awesome.
Yeah. So around the world, we've been lucky to have essentially demand from all sorts of different sectors, all sorts of different spaces, and all parts of the planet. We've been trying to focus and make sure that we prove out in each new space that we go into that we're helping people understand what's going on in that space, so they can essentially make their buildings infection proof, and so that the people who are in them don't have to worry about the air that they're breathing. And that's about more than what has traditionally been done with making sure there's low CO2 levels, making sure there's low dust levels. What we're really focused on is the living things that have DNA or RNA, like I said, viruses, bacteria, and molds. And that's been, monitoring airports all over North America. That's apartment buildings in Washington, D.C. That's offices everywhere. We're starting to do some schools, which is incredibly exciting for me personally. And it also includes places I never thought we'd be, like a royal palace in Europe.
Wow. Yeah, and yachts.
Yachts, yes, and yachts. I never thought I would be spending that much time on yachts.
It's pretty cool. What is there do you have a preferred market, or sector in how you guys are targeting your sales, or are people coming to you at this point?
Up until this point, it's really been folks coming to us, and that's been wonderful because we've deliberately really wanted to learn where we can have the most value most quickly. Where we've ended up at this point with that approach is about 40 to 45% of our spaces are off, usually Class A, or Class B offices in urban centers, but also offices in more industrial and suburbs as well. About 10, 15% in factories, distribution warehouses, and then really it's a long tail from there. From, like I mentioned, airports, apartment buildings, trying to really learn as much as we can, doing a lot of performance theaters. And what we're doing now is making sure that we have these wonderful blueprints that will let us get up and running incredibly quickly, no matter what kind of space it is. So what are people typically looking to monitor for, and if they're in a classroom versus what they are in if they're in a long-term care setting. And so that's really been what the first year and a half of being in market has been for us.
That's cool. So I know last time we met, we talked about, there's two components. There's the hardware, like the actual device, and then there's kind of following the Tesla model. There's the software. So you can do, pretty much real-time updates. People could be testing for new things overnight when you roll out a software update. But I was wondering, have you been impacted at all by any of the supply chain challenges that manufacturing has gone through in the last year or so when it comes to actually making the device itself?
That's a great question. I don't know anybody who has been making anything at scale that hasn't been affected. We started scaling just after a lot of the initial supply chain challenges hit. So we purposely designed the first few versions of the product of the hardware so that we could avoid the vast majority of those. So the effect hasn't been that bad on us, knock on wood. But what more challenging, from a very selfish point of view, is just, you have an entire country shut down right now. That makes a lot of the components that go into our product, as well as almost every other hardware product on the planet. And so it's gotten to the point where I wish we had Poppy all over China. I wish we had maybe started there and had a big impact on, before entire countries have to be entirely locked down.
Right. Well, I guess it's an opportunity now, right? Some receptive people. All right. So I'm curious. You and I have known each other a very long time. And I know you to be an exceptional planner, right? You have always, in my experience, had a contingency for every possible scenario. I also know, though, that you and Sam were thinking about Poppy prior to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So putting, COVID aside, what's the biggest curveball that you've been thrown as you've gone through the kind of sort of startup process, and how have you dealt with it?
It's such a good question. We touched a little bit on manufacturing, and so we had a vision, or we had some insight into what was going to be hard to procure and plan for that upfront, which is wonderful. And you do always have a plan B and C and D. If these folks can't manufacture on the time frame you need, then you've got other suppliers lined up and other options, other configurations. I think for me, though, related to COVID, but not about COVID, not about the fact that COVID started after we started Poppy, but it really has been, a curveball might even be too soft. A curveball would be too easy. It's more like, Olympic level ping pong tournament about the ever-changing perceptions about COVID and how people feel about COVID. If you've been close to the science, which I'm sure you have, the science has been pretty stable. It's been, we've learned a lot over the last few years, don't get me wrong, but it's, early on, if you're reading a lot of the core papers, there was a really clear understanding that it was airborne. There was a really clear understanding that mutations were going to continue no matter what. So a really clear understanding that some mutations are going to be worse for health outcomes and cause more death and more illness. Some were going to, be more contagious. If you know biology and you understand science, a lot of that was a little bit predictable, but also, it hasn't changed a whole bunch. What has changed is, literally almost minute by minute or hour by hour, it's felt like, is how different people have been reacting to it and feeling about it and thinking about it and how that's affected their decision making. And so we've been dancing on our feet for helping people while the science stays stable, making sure that the tone and the responses have been able to keep up with how vaccine rates are going, how interrupted or disrupted people's businesses have been, how their employees are feeling about coming back to work versus management's feeling about people coming back to work. So the social part of COVID, if I can call it that, has kept us on our feet and needed to have lots of contingency plans so that we can change, almost every day.
Yeah, that's way bigger. You're right. That's way bigger than a curveball. I'm just thinking of the experience here in Canada. You and I are both Canadian. And while I would say that Canada has been fairly conservative and tried to be science-minded in the approach to how to manage COVID, what the, preventative measures are, even here, it's a pretty big spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. And I imagine that spectrum is reflected in the, customers that you could potentially have. That's interesting.
I think that what's served us well, though, is while there have been so much debate and very strong feelings on multiple sides about what personal responsibility people can and should take, the benefit or the beauty of something like a passive surveillance system like Poppy is it's just the person who is responsible for the space that has to put something in the wall, right? And look at our software. And what we're doing is we're the, in some cases we're thought of the safety net. You can't necessarily control, who's coming into the building, if they're wearing masks, if they're vaccinated, if they're not. What you can control if you're responsible for a space is how well that space is set up to prevent anybody sick from making anybody else sick. And that's ventilation, and that's bringing in fresh air, and that's purification units. so many people have been doing so many good things to make sure the spaces are safe because they can't control every other factor. And they haven't had a way of measuring that. They haven't had a way of knowing that and being proactive and knowing if these, millions of dollars of investments have actually paid off. And so that's a lot of what we've been doing outside of the just monitoring for what's there. We've been helping people understand what would happen if it was there or if any kind of pathogen was in their space. And so they know if, they're making the right investments and the impact they're having.
Yeah. So that sort of fire inspector plus fire alarm sort of analogy that we were talking about. Yeah.
Let's make this a fireproof building. And
right.
Let's, if a fire does break out, let's make sure we can handle it quickly. Agree.
I'm just so thrilled and excited about your success. I'm going to switch topics a little bit, I think. Yeah. So when Steve and I were prepping for today's episode, I was asking him, well, what do you want to talk to EC about? And, typical Steve, you two are very similar. There was just like a plethora of ideas coming at me. So can we start with, what are your thoughts on Web 3.0 and the Metaverse? Both Steve and I were very interested in the word meta because we know that was your old company that you sold to Facebook. So do you have thoughts on that name or is that part still under NDA?
No, well, we did sell Meta, the company, to Zuck and his wife's philanthropy, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. This was our previous company before Poppy. Sam Molyneux and I were running along with his sister, Amy Molyneux, a company called Meta at meta.com. And we were using machine learning in order to organize all scientific knowledge. About 2 million papers are published every year. Scientists cannot keep up with the new papers in their field. And so we were looking to help scientists stay on top and accelerate their work. And then when Zuck and his wife announced their new philanthropy and their focus on science, sharing exactly the same mission we did, we ended up shortly after then selling our company Meta to them, which is, I think, the first time a tech company has ever been acquired by a philanthropy. So that was a unique experience. And then Sam and I helped lead one of the largest technology teams at the philanthropy. Fast forward a few years, Sam and I left to start Poppy, and then the assets were exchanged between Chan Zuckerberg and Facebook, and the name Meta and our domain, and all of that got transferred over to the organization who has it now. So not at all the outcome we expected when we were a small team in Toronto trying to help us a couple of scientists with our work, but never know the way life is going to go.
Yeah. Does it make you have a little beam of pride whenever you hear someone talk about Meta now? Because you're like, that was my name.
Well, it is a great name, and Sam and Meta.com it's a skill of my co-founder Sam. He can get the best domains, whether it's Poppy.com or Meta.com. He manages to wrangle them from the folks who get those originally. So that feels good. I think the Metaverse is a whole other topic entirely.
Yes. Yeah. So what are your thoughts? Web 3.0 Metaverse. Lay it on me.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings, to be honest. I think the intentions behind a lot of what the direction is make a lot of sense to me. So decentralized web. There's a lot of centralization out there. Decentralized financial systems. This is with my value system, I think this is potentially good, but it's going to be very, very hard to accomplish because there's a lot of systems built in place, like the global banking system, that are going to resist it for a very long time. I think on the metaverse side, I totally understand the need for folks to escape. I love the applications and potential applications of, augmented reality, helping people with physical disabilities, see the world, helping people see things from other people's perspectives, using technology to augment what we're doing or what we're trying to do. And I also totally appreciate the escapism of idea behind the metaverse. So I like a good video game like anybody else, and who doesn't want to be in a universe that they only had in their imagination before. On the flip side, I think the overwhelming sentiment I have about the metaverse at this stage anyways is about concern that it's going to have a whole bunch of people not focus on IRL, not focus on what's happening in real life,
Right.
like climate change and inequality and violence and war. And that's not what people can handle 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But that's where my heart is at. And the companies that I help mentor, these are the folks that want to make in real life improvements to the planet.
Yeah, that's you echo my I don't want to call it a concern. I think concern is too strong of a word, but I am wondering what's going to happen to in real life, when and if the metaverse actually takes off.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of me, I'm dating myself, but part of me thinks that almost like the gaming aspects to it takes me back to my 12-year-old being a dungeon master with my graph paper
Yep.
and building my own universe in D&D. So I'm still excited about that part of it
Yes.
as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting, I think, to see what happens going forward. When we met last time, one of the things that we talked about was, how busy you are. You're a serial entrepreneur. You spend a lot of your day focused on business and your work life. I was really happy to learn in our chat just prior to this conversation that you, like me, have a new puppy.
Yes.
So I know that's distract you from some of your work life, but sort of like Steve, I sometimes think that you missing an off switch, right? You're go, go, go all the time. So I wanted to know, how do you carve out the time for give back and mentorship? Because I know you do that, and you're quite well known actually in the tech space for those skills. And so that's one. So how do you find the time to give back? And the second one is, what do you do personally prior to puppy to battle burnout and brain fatigue?
Yeah, thank you. The mentorship, carving out time to answer the first part of your question, it's incredibly hard. So I've used social engineering to sort of force myself into taking the time. I always love it when I do it. Every time I take time away and I spend time with, especially entrepreneurs, especially underrepresented entrepreneurs who are really trying to make a difference, I walk away energized, and I've learned things and I adore it. But to carve the time out in the calendar in advance and stick to it, the best thing I found is this wonderful program called Creative Destruction Lab that I've been a part of for the last 6 years as a mentor, where they do the work of finding these early stage science-based startups and founders, usually folks who are, in a PhD program and have a cool thing that they've worked on in their thesis, and they're at the stage they're trying to figure out, can this be a company? Can this help people outside of the lab? And this organization, CDL, puts together a whole bunch of mentors, a whole bunch of founders, and runs it to the minute. So yesterday, for example, I got to spend time, one-on-one time with 8 early stage science-based startups and founders. And that use that energizes me for my other work, but it also, leads me to find folks, entrepreneurs who are particularly working on problems or particularly have a lot of passion that I connect with, and help and mentor them outside of the program. So only the social engineering of like disappointing people and making a lot of work for people if I backed out at the last minute, make sure I go incredibly consistently and do this incredibly consistently. But it's always been worth it. And it actually relates to your second question about the, burnout or brain fatigue. Maybe it's just my experience over the last week, but I realized my brain is like, I don't know. You've been going through training a puppy. Your puppy had teething problems early on, wanted to sort of put everything in their mouth.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been trying to educate myself on how to deal with that, and so much of the advice is, put something near them, like a chew toy that you want them to chew, and sort of redirect them, and then they'll stop chewing on the thing you don't want them to chew. And I realized as I'm going through this process that my brain is the same way. If I want my brain to take a break on problems to solve, in the company, I need to give my brain something else to chew on. And for me, that's always been puzzles, Sudoku, good mystery novel, a good video game. But it's been much more deliberate as I realize that's something that I need. If I try and do nothing, and not give my brain something to do, it's gonna eventually drift back to the most pressing problems to solve at work.
Right.
Are you the same?
Yes, of course, I'm wired the same way. But
Yeah.
my new thing, I discovered something thanks to a Christmas gift. Someone gave me a fairly large Lego set. And, I haven't played with Lego since I was a little kid. Amazing. You have to be focused enough to follow, basically the pattern.
Right.
Uh, in the book, you're making a beautiful thing. You can listen to an audiobook while you're doing it and stay completely outside of all the work stuff in your head. So,
Yes.
yes. Now that you have a puppy, I would not recommend Lego because there are too many little parts that could be swallowed. But yeah, I do that same kind of thing. And the puppy analogy, I think, of having something ready to distract
Hmm.
is perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, one last question before I let you go back to your real life. What are you tracking right now in terms of disruptors? So, what do you think we should be watching for in the next 1 to 3 years?
Oh, I love these kinds of
Mm,
questions. I am very, very lucky to get exposed to so much. The program I was mentioning earlier, I think there's like 20 different types of streams, they call them, with about 25 new ventures coming into each one of those at the beginning of the school year. And it's everything from themes like blockchain and space. And I'm usually in the robotics and sensor one or the AI one. I've tried out and met a bunch of the folks working on computational health. We've been thinking about personalized medicine for a long time, or applying artificial intelligence to help with problems in medicine and biology. And it's been a long time coming. There's been a lot of people working on it, and now having some incredible breakthroughs about being able to do massive problems at scale,
mhm.
to help drug discovery, to help, one of the earlier problems solved was, AI can actually recognize tumors or things on medical images, generally more reliable than humans once it's up and running. So for me, personalized medicine, the application of like big data to medicine and health is definitely one of the fields. We talked last time about space, and I know space is also one of those things that people tend to have mixed feelings on when they see billionaires spending so much money on space. What I've experienced has been the engineers and the scientists who are trying to use space as a place where we develop technologies that will actually be helpful on Earth. And so whether that's satellite tracking and image recognition of landmines, all space is not just about tourism. There's a lot of useful things happening up there as well, and a lot of people working on interesting problems. So that's definitely an area. And then for me, it's the third category is climate change and new materials, which often go hand in hand. Using, again, computational models to be like, oh, if we actually model what would be a great new plastic, what would be a great new, that actually is biodegradable, whether we can predict something before we actually go out and do the scientific experiments for it and create. One of the organizations I was talking to yesterday, they use essentially nanopores to help cool buildings. And so, the ability, it's early stage, but the ability to basically use something that's smaller than, 100,000th of a width of a piece of paper, or like a thickness of a piece of paper, that kind of, technology at the scale of a nanometer to change entirely how we do heating and cooling of buildings, which use about 40% of the energy on the planet every year. I can't even imagine how far this climate change intersection with new materials is going to take us over the next, 5, 10, 15 years.
Okay. So I lied to you. I actually do have one last thing, and it's really my last thing. And I'm asking on behalf of Steve because I know he'll know. What do you think of Elon Musk and Twitter?
Oh, so many thoughts. I think what I will say is the best, and this might only be funny to Canadians. The best response I saw to all of that was a tweet that said, why do billionaires insist on spending $40+ billion on buying social media platforms when they can buy a perfectly nice home in Toronto for the same amount of money?
I think that is funny. You could insert London, Vancouver, San Francisco, right? That's great. Thank you so much for coming back, Elizabeth. It was wonderful to talk to you. I'm super excited about Poppy's continued success. And, I wouldn't be surprised if we ask you back again for an update. So I hope you would be willing.
Always. It would totally be my pleasure.
All right. Thank you. For our listeners, if you liked what you heard today, you can hear more from the Imagine Your Future team by accessing our website at www.isg-1.com/podcasts, or you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast content. We really do and really are focused and making this podcast as audience driven as possible. Bringing EC back is one of those examples. So if there's a subject that you want to cover or a guest that you'd like to hear from, just let us know. We would be more than happy to accommodate. And please remember to rate the pod on whatever your podcasting app is. Thank you so much for listening, and let's talk again.